Once, not so long ago, a great green common stretched across the land. It wasn't owned by one person or a family or even a king. It belonged to the rhythm of the seasons, to the whispering winds, and to anyone who needed it. Here, families grazed their goats, gathered berries for their winter stores, and cut firewood to warm their homes. They lived in small villages, their days marked by the rising sun and the setting moon, not by the clang of factory bells. They might not have been rich, but they were free in a way that felt as vast as the sky above them. Then came the fences. First, one proud lord, then another began to mark off pieces of the common. They drove posts into the earth, strung wire, and declared, "This is mine." They called it private property. The old ways, where a family simply was on the land, were pushed aside. The villagers watched, bewildered, as their traditional grazing grounds shrank, then vanished. "But where will we take our goats?" they cried. "Where will we find our berries?" The lords, now owners, simply shrugged. "There is work in the towns," they said. "Go earn your keep." So the people, who had known the feel of rich soil between their fingers and the taste of wild honey, were forced to leave. They traded the open fields for cobbled streets, the scent of pine for the smoke of chimneys. They learned to wake to bells, to perform tasks they didn't choose, for wages they hoped would cover the tiny, cramped rooms they now rented from others. They no longer owned even the roof over their heads. They called it progress. Years later, across a great ocean, a new land shimmered with promise. "Come!" the agents cried. "There is land for all! 160 acres, free for the taking!" The people, descendants of those who had lost their commons, listened with hungry hearts. They boarded ships, their dreams as wide as the sea itself. They were fleeing the very enclosures that had taken their grandparents' freedom. They arrived full of hope, only to find that this free land wasn't empty. It was already home to others, people whose ancient ways revolved around sharing and seasonal movements, not fences and deeds. Tribes like the Cherokee, for example, lived in complex societies where land was held communally by the clan, not as individual private plots. Their connection to the land was spiritual and sustained their way of life, their ceremonies, and their very identity. But soon, the same story began to unfold. Treaties were broken, tribes pushed aside, often violently, and the vast open expanses were carved into squares, each with a title. The newcomers, the immigrants, were given deeds to land that had been taken. Once again, common land became private property, but this time, it was the indigenous peoples who were displaced. The dream of land ownership for some came at the cost of the existing ownership and way of life for others. Today, the fences are mostly invisible, made of contracts and algorithms. The green common is mostly gone, replaced by cityscapes where even the smallest plot of land is owned, bought, or most often rented. This new land wasn't just settled by hopeful families, it was shaped by a select group of powerful individuals. The same elites who had driven the enclosure in the old world, the bankers, the wealthy landowners, the merchants, came over too. They weren't seeking a patch of dirt to farm. They were seeking a new continent to build a system upon. They came alongside the founding fathers, and together, they created a new nation and a new order. The founders wrote the laws, established the banks, and created a currency. That currency, once backed by gold, is now supported by the publicist trust in the system they designed. It's difficult to maintain this trust when we owe a large debt to other countries, which creates a risk of being controlled or corrupted by foreign nations. The dream of freedom was held up as a banner, while the reality was a new form of enclosure. Instead of building walls around land, they built an invisible system around money. This great machine, once just a town, then a nation, is now a global web. It doesn't ask for your land anymore. It asks for your time, your focus, your energy. It pays you in numbers on a screen, digits that can vanish with the flip of a switch. We are all bound to this system, working to live and living to work, in a way that feels like an endless cycle. The system demands that you be a consumer, a worker, a good citizen of the state, but it doesn't leave much room for who you are otherwise. This cycle has a subtle but profound effect on the soul. The constant motion, the demand to produce, the lack of ownership, means there is little time or space to remember. We are so busy building someone else's wealth that we forget our own story. We forget the stories of our great-great-grandparents, the villagers who lived on the common, the traditions they carried, the songs they sang. We become individuals in a massive, rootless system, defined by our job titles and our debt, rather than by our heritage or our clan. And this is no accident. In the old world, the family and the clan were the primary unit of survival. They provided safety, support, and identity. A person was not alone in a family, and a family was not alone in a community. If a father got sick, his brothers, sisters, and neighbors would help. If a house needed to be built, the whole community would come together. But a system built on individual production and consumption requires you to be an individual. It can't have you relying on your family or your community, because then you might not need to be so dependent on the system itself. So, over time, the ties that once bound families together were slowly loosened. The system created public services, social programs, healthcare, and unemployment benefits that, while helpful, also subtly replaced the old family and community networks. It created new ideas of identity that were tied to a job or a consumer brand or a political party, rather than to a family name or a tribal lineage. A family became less of a self-sustaining unit and more of a collection of dependent individuals, each working to earn their own money to pay for things the family once provided for itself. We have traded a tangible connection to the land and our ancestors for a life chained to a digital currency that can't feed our families or tell us who we are. We are all, in a way, still searching for that last patch of green, that space where we can simply be, without having to pay for every breath, every step, every roof over our heads. A space where the land, in its essence, feels like it belongs to everyone, and to no one once more.